Welcome back to the Kevin O'Connor Show. Thank you, everybody, for the absolutely great response to our first episode. We received many mailbag questions, more than I ever could have anticipated. If you want to hit us up, go to kocshow@yahoosports.com. Email us there. Video notes, audio notes, those go to the top of the line. We'll take emails as well. We're recording this today on Friday at 12:08 Eastern Time, and I'm joined by an old friend. It's Yahoo Sports senior NBA writer Dan Devine. What's up, Dan?
Not much, Kevin. It feels weird at the beginning. The new setting, resumption of pleasantries. We're going to get comfortable in a little bit, but welcome aboard. It's nice to see you. And I hope that all of the jerseys don't encroach on you from the background. I hope that you're able to maintain ideal spacing as we go through the NBA's preseason.
Yes. So hopefully the jerseys do not come to life. There is a lack of spacing behind me. I got Zion, Rudy Gobert. Let's talk about the Pelicans right here. Let's knock out the headlines. Shams Charania made his ESPN debut on Thursday. And one of the pieces of news that he broke, not the Bronny one, we'll talk about that a little bit later, was that he says Herb Jones will be the starting center effectively for the New Orleans Pelicans. He mentioned how everybody talks about Zion as a 5, but in reality, it could be Herb Jones at 5, Zion, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, and DeJounte Murray, that could be their starting 5. Now, Dan, obviously, that's a small 5. Yeah. Shamit Dua, a great Pelicans reporter, asked Pelicans head coach Willie Green earlier today, what's the logic behind that potential lineup that they could use? And Willie Green said, what they're really doing is working on different lineups for different situations depending on the matchup. And that's kind of my takeaway here, is that maybe New Orleans is going to be one of those teams that uses different lineups depending on the game. Is that where you see things going for New Orleans? And is this something that you think that they can even survive with those 5 out there? Is it even worth doing?
I think that's the question to me. As I sort their roster by height, I'm like, you can have different lineups for different situations, but you've got 3 guys over 6'9", and they're Yves Missi, Carlo Makovic, and Trey Jemison. I kind of feel like you're going to need a bigger dude than that in a conference where you have to play a whole lot of big dudes. It is, and I think that's what's so sort of curious to me about the way the Pelicans have engaged in this whole process. Obviously, I think if they had their druthers, the starting center on this year's team would be like whoever they got for Brandon Ingram, but that deal didn't happen. And so now you have 6 guys who feel like they should be starters, including Trey Murphy III, who in this construct is not starting and maybe will in certain lineups, certain circumstances, but you wind up where you have a lot of length, you've got a lot of playmaking, you've got a lot of shooting, you've got a lot of interesting pieces, but you don't have the like for like matchup physically. And so, I mean, Willie Green, I think, wants to avoid labeling people as best he can. He seems to be reluctant to say anybody's the 5 in those matchups. We're going to play positionless. We're going to be versatile, all these sorts of buzzwords. At a certain point, though, someone's going to have to guard the biggest dude on the other team. I mean, I trust Herb Jones to guard pretty much everybody in the NBA. So from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense to me. But I think opponents will show you who they think the center is by like who they're bringing into ball screens and who they're trying to pick on. And my guess is that that's going to be Zion Williamson at the start of it and CJ McCollum on the top end of it. And so in terms of what the success rate is and how you survive, yeah, like the lineups that had no center in them, but that did have CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, and Zion last year, only like 47 minutes of it, and they were outscored on the season. I think that they, obviously there were, bigs that were there worth using, but at a certain point, you have to like look at, say, how do we get our best 5 on the floor? The interesting question to me is just at what point does that require getting Trey Murphy on the floor and having CJ McCollum take a step back? CJ has sort of grinned his way through that question in training camp and said, like, I'm not going to volunteer for it. And I get it. Like, he's a proud guy who's, scored a ton of points in the league and, an established veteran. But like, that's the pivot point to me. And I kind of find myself wondering if you can't rebound with those Zion at the 5, Herb at the 5 lineups, if you can't stop the ball up top with CJ there, you're going to run into a lot of problems quick. And that's been a team that's hung its hat on defense. And a little bit tough to get started with this sort of lineup, but maybe they'll be able to outscore everybody. And Zion's about to go off on like an MVP kind of run. We'll have to see, how that plays out.
Sure. And I think ultimately, if they go with the Herb Zion front court early in the season, that's what they're optimizing is for offense, because that team will get shredded, destroyed, just absolutely embarrassed on the boards with Herb Jones and Zion. I love Herb Jones. Herb Jones is one of my favorite players since he was at Alabama. He's incredible. He's one of the best defensive players we've seen in the last 20 years. But the fact is that he's not a rebounder, and Zion isn't much of a rebounder either. So you're going to get destroyed with so many of these matchups in the Western Conference, as you said. So I think for them, you can say that also with Daniel Tice out there, though. You can say that with Missy, who is just going to be a rookie and has issues with keeping out of foul trouble. At least he did it his freshman year at Baylor, and I would assume that's going to continue like it does for almost all rookie bigs. So
sure.
I think for New Orleans, it's going to be a struggle figuring out what makes most sense early in the season defensively. I thought you said it perfectly, Dan. It's the opponent that's going to determine who your quote-unquote center is, because they're going to pick on the weakest matchup. And a lot of the time, they're just going to try to attack Zion, wear him out, and just try to exploit him on the perimeter. You're going to see New Orleans probably switch 1 through 5. One of the other things Willie Green mentioned is they're going to pick and choose when to double, when to throw 2. That strains your defense a lot. I mean, like I think like they need a big at some point, whether it's flipping CJ McCollum, whether it's trading Brandon Ingram, as we've heard about all summer as a possibility. In the Western Conference being as deep as it is, these early season games do matter. They do. For seeding, if you want to get a guaranteed top 6 seed or even getting in the play-in. Like somebody good is going to miss the play-in this year. And so I think for New Orleans early in this season, it wouldn't shock me one bit if they sputter a bit to start the year, despite how good I feel about Zion entering the year, despite how good I feel about DeJounte Murray. Do you agree with me there, Dan, about that? They're kind of the team where I'm like, I don't know. I don't feel a lot of confidence in them right now.
I am maybe in the tank too much for the Pelicans. I've been accused of that over the past couple of seasons. Like
me too. I've always been, Chris Vernon used to call me Kevin O. Pelican. So that's where like I hope Pelicans fans know these are my honest thoughts. Like there's a lot of good, but there's also I'm like the West is so stacked.
How do you even remember that Chris called you that? Of the list of things Chris called you, like they're that to jump up to the top of your mind. But I think
I also have 2 Pelicans jerseys.
That's a great
behind
point.
me. I have a Zion behind me and a Brandon Ingram right behind me as well.
The backdrop doesn't lie. That's true. The frames don't lie. I think you're right to say like so much of this winds up becoming. It'll come down to, who's healthy, down the stretch of the season, who suffers significant injuries, who's able to get to their style of play early and kind of build a little bit of a lead. But there's 13 teams in the West that we can reasonably, or that maybe harbor real aspirations of postseason play. There's no easy nights over there. But I think that's, even in going through that and going through the list of teams that either were there last year and, what would want to be there next year. One of the things you see over and over again as you go through it is like, small ball feels a little bit outdated when you look at the teams you're going to have to play, like Oklahoma City with Chet Holmgren and now Isaiah Hartenstein, Denver with Nikola Jokic, the Timberwolves, even after the Cat trade, still with Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle and Naz Reid, the Mavericks with Lively and Gafford, AD with the Lakers, like even Phoenix has Nurkic, like all of these teams that are like pretty good or expected to be a lot better than that. And all the way down to obviously Victor Wembanyama in San Antonio, like big is back, right? Big is in, and that has been the trend over the last couple of years. Teams really sizing up, and even a lot of teams doing more too big front court. So this is like a zag, but maybe it feels almost like a decade old zag, and it's going to be heavily dependent on 5 guys guarding their yard. And when the 5 guys you're like relying on now include Zion, Brandon Ingram, and CJ McCollum, I don't know. Willie Green has produced consecutive top 10 defenses with pieces I didn't necessarily see coming with that. So maybe, I'm sure I would imagine he knows a hell of a lot better than I do, but I think that's going to be an awfully tall task.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It feels like a decade old. And when the Warriors did it with Draymond Green a decade ago, the league did not have the level of size and skill combination that they have today. Because a lot of those bigs that you listed, they're not just 7-footers. They're not just 6'11" with 7'2" wingspans. They have a handle. They can play on the perimeter. They have a jumper. The league has evolved. It's different now. And like it's really like a long ball era right now in the NBA from a 3-point perspective, but also from a wingspan perspective. And so for the Pelicans right now, That's the struggle. To me, they need to make a trade. They're going to have to make a trade at some point during the season. CJ McCollum maybe has to go, maybe has to accept a bench role, but they are a team that's going to have to make a move. On Thursday night, the Lakers and Bucks played in Milwaukee. LeBron was not happy about that, posting about it on X. I can't believe we have to fly to Milwaukee for a preseason game. Sorry, LeBron, it's your job. They beat the Bucks on Thursday night. JJ Redick's first win. Granted, it's just a preseason game. I thought it was kind of funny. It goes against Doc Rivers, who he's kind of sparred with a little bit publicly when JJ had his podcast, and against Darvin Ham, an assistant coach for the Milwaukee Bucks. Shams said on Thursday that Bronny James is expected to play opening night. Now, for Bronny, it has not been a good preseason at all. He's played 3 preseason games. He's 0 of 4 from 3, 1 of 7 from 2. He has 5 turnovers to only 1 assist, 3 fouls, 3 blocks, 3 rebounds. Dan, I'm worried about Bronny. I mean, I was hoping to see some progress from shooting after he shot only 20% on catch and shoot threes from USC last year, only 30% on catch and shoot threes at the high school level. I was hoping that we'd see some progress, but I thought Tom Haverstraw nailed it on the Tuesday episode. He said this could be a circus. This is something that he worries about being a distraction. And if he's playing opening night, I think it can last no longer than just a game. Just get the moment with LeBron and Bronny, and then time to put him in the G League.
Just peeling the curtain back a little bit, our editor, Matt Wong, asked me after I filed my preview of the Lakers season, which I think went up earlier this week at Yahoo Sports. Should we get a mention of Bronny in there, just, either in terms of the circus aspect or in terms of what you think he could do? And I said, honestly, no, I don't think it's going to matter a whole hell of a lot in terms of the on-court fate of the Los Angeles Lakers, because what we've seen in the preseason looks an awful lot to me like a kid that just turned 20 and knows the 55th pick in the draft not being ready for this. And I don't think that's something that's his fault. I don't think that's something that's like impossible to come back from. I don't think it's something that we shouldn't expect and that we wouldn't expect if there was any other name on the back of that jersey. The list of like 55th and later picks to have made an impact. There are players who have done that, but it's like Etuan Moore, right? Like it's guys who are sort of a little bit further down the pecking order for the respective teams that they played on, and also played on like 10 teams. So expecting something dramatically different from Bronny James, whatever it was, like 15 months or 16 months removed from cardiac arrest after as you mentioned, like not exactly covering himself in glory at USC during that lone year. I think any expectation of more than that is either wish casting or unfair or both. And so to me, the idea of they're going to do it on opening night, it doesn't shock me. I mean, they got it out of the way in like the first preseason game, right? They were like, we're going to do this because it's something that's important to us to do. And then the rest of it's going to be, can he sort of sink or swim, or how do we put him in the best position to do it? That to me seems like South Bay has South Bay written all over it, because,
it's not going to last long, Dan. It's not.
Checking out the Milwaukee game, like he checked in, I think like 3.5 minutes to go in the third quarter and just kind of did 5 or 6 minutes of cardio and again, like not killing him for this. Like it just didn't seem like he was really able to make much of an impact on the game. And that is the case for a lot of young guys who are like not overwhelming physical specimens. Like he's like a 6'2" guard. It's a hard thing to make your impact and to make your presence felt and to be able to make a significant positive contribution at the NBA level for a player of that type. And he's got his work cut out for him. I think he knows that. I think everybody around them knows that. The big Baxter Holmes piece at ESPN about this sort of setting him up for failure, I think there's a lot of interesting things in there. And one of the ones that made me wince a little bit was Rich Paul referring to Bronny as like an influencer / basketball player. And I was like, well, if that's what this is, then that's going to, like, the first part of that is going to run out.
It's exactly what it is. He's telling the truth. That's exactly what it is. That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. Bronny James is not an NBA level caliber player right now. Nowhere close. He likely never will be. He's only 6'2". He's not a lockdown defender. He is not a shooter. He's not a playmaker. He's the son of LeBron James. And I'm rooting for Bronny. I think it would be awesome to see Bronny in the NBA for a decade plus, long after LeBron's gone, but he's nowhere close. Okay. And so I think that it is an influencer thing. I think Rich Paul's telling the truth. And I hope he develops. I hope the shot starts falling, but it has not been consistent in high school. It was a negative at USC. He's now 0-4 from 3 in the preseason after struggling in the summer league. We have a very large sample size that Bronny is not a knockdown shooter, even though the mechanics look beautiful, even though it looks great, even though he's athletic, he's not a creator. He's just not an NBA player anywhere close yet. And so I'm rooting for it to work, but I'm not even sure he's going to be productive at the G League level. Let's move on to the Knicks. We got news yesterday that Mitchell Robinson will be out for the remainder of the calendar year. Are the Knicks going to be okay with Cat playing full-time center, Dan, for the rest of the year? Is that fine? Is it okay to wait till January for Mitchell Robinson?
Well, I mean, whether it's okay or not, it's what they got to deal with, right? Like, I think this is the idea that Mitch was going to miss the first, 30 games or so was a much bigger problem before you had a center you felt like you could live with every night. And I mean, the inherent gamble of the Karl-Anthony Towns trade is, can the offense be good enough to make up for whatever slippage you deal with on the other end? And also, can Cat returned to full-time work as a 5 after having worked as a 4 for a couple of years in Minnesota? Like, is he better equipped to play play the drop coverage, or maybe even a little higher on the floor? Like, Tibbs had used Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein sort of more closer to up to touch last year, not just always in a deep drop. Maybe Cat's a little more comfortable in that. Maybe he's able to make it work there. Maybe he's insulated by the monsters they've got on the wing now with OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, and Josh Hart around him, to where you're not looking at like a bottom tier defense like those Wolves teams were for a long time. You can get maybe closer to middle of the pack, fringe top 10, and then the offense is good. It's sort of like the Nuggets build, right? That model of like, Jokic is going to guarantee us a top 5 offense. So then can we sort of filter in around there? It's what Dallas wound up riding to the finals last year. And so I think that's the idea. And I think if what you saw, obviously the first game for Cat was not particularly wonderful as far as his shooting efficiency, but you saw the impact and just the way the offense is going to work a little bit differently. Then he goes off after a slow start against Washington, finishes with, I think, 25 and 12. That's the idea, is like, we're going to be overwhelming on offense. The matchup problems we create with Cat at the 5 and the spacing that engenders for everybody else. Josh Hart talked about it on Media Day. Like, the court's wide open, the rim will be wide open, driving lanes, back cuts, all those things are going to be wide open for us. We can invert the offense. Jalen Brunson's going to be able to be down there playing with his back to the basket. It just creates a whole new geography of the floor on offense. And we feel like that's an overwhelming enough advantage to make up for any slippage on the back end. So I think that they're going to, if the plan works to the way they intend it, yeah, getting Mitch back in January, all of a sudden, now you're going from a team that looks really shallow right now and doesn't have a whole lot of front court depth to, you got a starting caliber big able to come in 20, 25 minutes maybe off the bench. And now you've got a 9-man rotation that you feel a lot more confident in. And that's sort of what you would hope to build over the second half of the season. Get him back up to speed, get that rotation locked in to be able to go and hopefully win several playoff rounds.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, like you said, the offense will be overwhelming. It's going to be incredible. I think you're going to see an even better version of Jalen Brunson. And it's funny, the Cat acquisition has completely overshadowed the debut of Mikal Bridges earlier in the week as well. Yeah. Mikal Bridges, with all the spacing he'll have to operate with, it'll feel more like a hybrid version of what we saw with the Nets and what he did with the Suns, where he's able to be like a supercharged role player, but he's going to have nights where he's feeling it and he can get hot. He's going to be running a lot of pick and rolls. He can ISO. All of these guys are going to benefit on the Knicks. So I think ultimately their offense is going to be top 2, top 3, maybe even number 1 in the NBA. And Cat also, like I said to Tom earlier in the week, it's not like he's ever had this amount of wing support.
Yeah.
In Minnesota. Like, what the Knicks have is ludicrous with OG and Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, up and down the line, even their depth. So I think for Cat, he's in a position now where he's individually better defensively. He's individually more versatile. We've seen him develop into a better perimeter defender. Look at him 2 years ago, the first year with Gobert compared to last year, his improvement. Cat is somebody, despite a lot of his flaws over the years, you can knock him sometimes for being a crybaby, and you can knock him for some of the disappointing performances in the playoffs. He is such a malleable star in that he is shape-shifted into different roles over the years, depending on his team and what has been asked of him, whether he's needed to be a high-volume scorer, whether he's needed to be a spacer, where he's needed to play on defense. And I think for the Knicks, that's what they're going to find out with him this year, that he can do different things depending on the environment, depending on the lineup. And so when Mitchell Robinson comes back, and or if he can't stay healthy and they have to find another big, whatever the path is moving forward for the Knicks, Karl Anthony Towns is in a position where he's going to be able to, I think, effectively play in that role regardless of what's asked for him.
Let me ask you this question, though, because I think the thing, when the Mikal Bridges trade happened, the immediate sort of snap reaction was, this is the Knicks trying to match up with the Celtics wings on offense, right? Like you need two guys to guard Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now you got to. And now with Towns, it feels a little bit less to me like, and maybe it's like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, but it's less like the Knicks are trying to match up with the Celtics and a little bit more like they're trying to be the Celtics. Like they're looking at it and saying, that's kind of the new meta. That's the offensive, like the way that teams are going to work now is 5 guys that can all dribble, pass, shoot, cut, and can combine in different versions of the 2-man game, can occupy different spots on the floor, not necessarily interchangeably, but that sort of overlapping skill sets, maybe like harmonic convergence. Does that seem like maybe a bridge too far? I'm not saying like, do you think that the Knicks are the new Celtics, but in terms of that idea of roster building, not just we need to match up with them, but we've got to be able to fight fire with them.
Sure. I think that is exactly what they're trying to do. I do. I think you can see it last year. Celtics get Porzingis, a 5 who can effectively space the floor and protect the rim. Well, the Knicks had Karl Anthony Towns, a 5 who is one of the best shooters in the league, regardless of position. And he has proven that he can be a plus defender as well. So now surrounded by a bunch of long-armed, versatile, hard-nosed wings and shot creation in the backcourt with Jalen Brunson. You get McBride off the bench as well, who I think is going to be really a DiVincenzo replacement with his shooting ability as well, even though he's a little bit smaller. So the Knicks have depth. They have top-end talent. They have all-star quality talent. They look a little different in terms of Boston's getting their all-stars from the forward spot, Brown and Tatum, and the Knicks are getting it from the point guard spot and Brunson in the center spot and Cat. But it's not like Bridges and, hasn't had stretches like that. It's not like OG can't be an all defensive caliber player. And, Josh Hart being not necessarily going to be a player who's rewarded. He's not going to get an award at the end of the year, but he's a hustle king type of player. So I think for the Knicks, they definitely are trying to build that top end level depth, and they're trying to have that versatility. And Boston's lineup flexibility as well is the other thing that they have. They can play with 2 bigs. They can play with 1 big, and if they really want to, they can go with Jason Tatum at the 5 in really short spurts. And that's the difference between what I think, the Celtics and the Knicks and what some of these teams of that tier have versus the Pelicans, where it's like, well, we kind of have to start Herb Jones at center because we have Daniel Tice as our center. So there's a different level in terms of what these head coaches can turn to on the floor. And the Knicks are one of those few teams that have the ability to really play any style, especially once Mitchell Robinson comes back with 2 bigs or 1 big. And maybe if you really need to, you can throw OG at the 5 for a short stretch. You have that card that you can pull considering the amount of length and versatility you have. Is there what other teams are even in that category in the NBA right now that can say we can play 2 bigs effectively, 1 big effectively, or even no bigs effectively? There's not too many, right? Like who else is on that list, Dan?
I mean, the one that jumps to mind is Oklahoma City, right? I mean, that was stylistically, and that was even going back to the playoff. We were getting so much preview writing on the brain right now because I'm just rifling through season previews, but also the finals preview that I wrote when I was looking at the matchup of Boston versus Dallas. And I'm like, the team that gave Dallas the hardest time in the West was Oklahoma City. And that's basic. Then you look at it and you're like, they're structured almost exactly like the Celtics are. It's not, again, you mentioned the all-stars coming from different positions, but 5 out wings everywhere can play sort of different styles. The one thing they couldn't do was go double big. They didn't really have the bodies for that. You were asking big Jalen Williams to sort of occupy a too large a role in that structure. Well, now you have Hartenstein, right? And so you can go play one big, either Chet or Hartenstein at the 5, and feel totally comfortable with the wing depth you've got, especially with Caruso in the door. Or you can go 2 bigs and you can play huge, right? You can bump, with the wings that they've got, you could bump Jalen Williams down to, or J Dub. You can bump him down to the 2, right? You could have him be the ball handler, and you can play all sorts of huge dudes all over the place. I think their level of versatility, again, to me, feels like a reflection of this is the direction the league is going and what you require from all 5 positions on the floor at any given time, all 5 players on the floor at any given time. And to me, a sort of mirror version of what Boston was able to ride to a title last year. But you're right. There's not a whole lot beyond that. And I think it's probably not not too far outside the realm of why these are the teams that we expect to win the championship or be in the conversation for it, be there at the end of the year. The ones who have the most ways to play without giving something up, the most ways to beat you without getting beat on the back end. Like, we can offensive rebound and get back in transition. We can spread the floor and we can pound the rim. You've got to be able to fight left-handed. You've got to be able to have different ways to skin a cat in the playoffs. And I think that's what you're seeing from these sorts of teams that can match that size and that skill.
We're going to talk more about OKC in a minute, but first, just want to remind the listeners, hit up the mailbag, KOCshow@yahoosports.com. We actually have a lot of questions for next Tuesday's episode already, so I'm thinking about let's start stacking up some questions for the following week. That's going to be a season prediction episode, so I'd love it if you guys can send your boldest or hottest season predictions. That'll be for the following week because we got a lot for next week already. That's at KOCshow@yahoosports.com. Yahoo Fantasy Basketball is also back this season. You can create or join a private league with your friends or join a public league to show the world your fantasy skills. To sign up, visit yahoo.com/fantasy basketball. All right, Dan, I think you nailed it with OKC. They're one of those few teams that has the ability to play a bunch of different styles. Like they flip Josh Giddey, you get Alex Caruso, one of the best defenders in basketball, a good spot-up shooter. Well, you need rebounding? Well, you get Isaiah Hartenstein, one of the best rebounders in basketball, also a very good defender. And you look at OKC this year, BetMGM has them at 56.5 wins for their over-under. As you said, you're doing your season previews for Yahoo Sports. You covered the Thunder in that one, and you said you're taking the over for Oklahoma City, as I would too. And one of the reasons why with OKC is this roster as is stacked with really no holes. But it's the 17 first-round picks over the next 7 years in which that they can do whatever they need to do during the season. If they decide we can upgrade here or there, or we have an opportunity to do this or that, star becomes available, we want this guy, they can go out and do it. They can get whoever it is that they want. And so I think with Oklahoma City, they're in a position last year where they weren't ready to make that big move. They wanted to evaluate and figure out who they are. And this year, the summer, they solved those issues, and now they're in a position now where it's like, okay, now it's winning time. Now it's time to make that move. So that's one of the reasons why I take the over for Oklahoma City. Why is it that you feel so confident in them as an over? Because 56.5 for the youngest team in the basketball is a lot.
It's a giant number. And it's well, first off, the important thing to note on every commentary that I have on over-unders is that I'm not actually betting any of it. So if you I'm not a gambling man. I'm too fearful. I'm a scared bird. I won't be going into those deep waters, my man. But if you guys want to, go for it. One of my favorite things that somebody responded to about my writing, I think it was either last year or 2 years ago, was like, I love your writing and I love when you make picks for series because then I just fade you and go the other way. And I was like, that sucks. But like, if it makes you money, then I'm happy, man. Like, it's whatever works for you. I get paid and you get paid. That works out great. My confidence in Oklahoma City was that there was basically 2 things they were bad at. And it was, or 2 sort of big holes that they had. And it was their rebounding, and that there was one guy in their starting lineup and in their postseason rotation that you could just ignore and sag off of on the perimeter. So they turned him into Alex Caruso, who is one of the, not only, as you mentioned, one of the best perimeter defenders in the world, a guy who can guard up and down sort of all over the map. He is also a legitimately better catch and shoot 3-point shooter. And I mean, doesn't have the passing vision or size that Giddey has, but I think he's going to fit perfectly into their structure. And then your rebounding concerns kind of go away when you bring in Isaiah Hartenstein, who is one of the best offensive rebounders in the league, a massive 7 foot, 250-pound impediment in the paint, a guy who boxes out, who can clear the path and give opportunities for those wings to, go grab the ball and go. Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander grab and go, Jalen Williams grab and go. Like they've got guys who can do that, and he's going to be able to sort of road grade for them while also being another sort of additive force on the offensive end where he can be a dribble handoff partner for any of their guys.
We saw that in their first preseason game together, Hartenstein and Chet doing that together. Beautiful.
Yeah, 4 or 5 DHOs with those guys is kind of ridiculous. And Hartenstein can also be, you run off ball actions when he's up at the elbow on the hub. He can make the backdoor passes. The Knicks made a ton of hay out of that last year. So they have so many ways to beat you. I think almost all of their main guys are 25 or under. And so or with the exception now of Caruso and Hartenstein, I'm not sure exactly, but they're like the idea of, even if progress isn't linear, I think a lot of those guys are going to get better. It would not shock me at all if you looked at 3 Oklahoma City Thunder players as all-stars this season with Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren joining SGA. Like there's so many pathways for them to be better before, as you said, getting to the part where they can look at this year's roster come February or January and go, all right, instead of like waiting and maybe taking like an upside, like a low risk, potential high reward swing at Gordon Hayward, we feel like we know exactly what we need, exactly where our bread is buttered, and we can go aggressively after that guy with the biggest war chest in the NBA. So to me, it's like there's incentive to be great. There's opportunity. There's players that are going to get them there. We are already talking about a team that was top 4 on both ends of the ball last year. All their young guys can get better, and they can go get whoever the hell they want. So like, if that's not a recipe for a high 50s win team, I don't know what is. And I think that there's a reason why you're seeing them go off as a heavy favorite heading into the season. It felt like a team maybe had 1 or 2 holes, and then they filled them and they have the opportunity to fill even more. I think it's going to be a pretty, they are to me the best threat since maybe, I guess the second half Udoka Celtics team, and that to be the first team that goes like first on offense, first on defense, first net rating since the KD Warriors. I feel like that's what this team is structured as, and it's just a matter of whether they get there.
Well, they have a tremendous head coach too in Mark Daigneault. Great schematically. I think the players really, really like him as well. There's good chemistry on that team, and especially saw that last year on the post-game interviews and the way they embrace different roles. I mean, guys are in and out of that lineup. There's good players on OKC that aren't playing. Like they're so deep. They have good players that don't get minutes every single night. And so I think for OKC, if I'm like really, really nitpicking with what are they missing? To me, it's still that second star. It's the clear-cut second star. And that's where, you hope Chet takes a leap. You hope Jalen Williams takes a leap. And I think the guy really could be Jalen Williams.
Yeah.
One of the flaws in his game last year was a lack of willingness to take a high frequency of threes. That really popped up for him in the postseason at times where it felt like he was reluctant. Well, in preseason, he's taken 10 3-pointers in 33 total minutes. Last year, he averaged 3.4 threes in 31 minutes per game. So he's showing a willingness to fire, especially when contested. His shot may even look slightly quicker as well to get those shots off. And Jalen Williams, his year 1 progress, from the start of the season with OKC to the end of it, and then last year, the way he took a leap from year 1 to year 2, he's still only 23 years old. He doesn't turn 24 until April, just before the playoffs begin. You talk about youth, SGA, the progress he's made, Chet, the progress he will make. Jalen Williams, Thunder fans know this, how good and how talented he is. But to me, I think he's the guy that really needs to take that leap this year for the Oklahoma City Thunder to go from, more than just amazing regular season team, but to become an actual finals threat, a team that can overcome the fact that they're so young. To me, that's on Jalen Williams above everybody else to be that second star on that team. And preseason seems like a positive indicator. It's 33-minute sample size in the preseason. How relevant is it really in terms of results? It's not. But I think preseason is very relevant in terms of trends and how a player expects to play. And 10 threes in 33 minutes is at least indicative of a guy that's going to go way up from 3.4 per game. So I'd feel good about that from the Thunder perspective. Have you seen any other indicators in preseason or when you look forward with OKC that make you feel like they could get that second star to pop up this year?
I'm a huge believer in Jalen Williams. I wrote about him sort of last year as like maybe their guy is already hiding in plain sight. That you look at the statistical production at the age and the company that he was keeping, even just with what he did last year, was guys that would go on to win MVPs and make all NBA teams. And so he didn't average 20. He had that rocky postseason. Oh, I think the postseason also, it has to come in context. He was guarding Kyrie Irving that whole series. And then so like his offensive dip but that to whom much is given, much is expected, right? And so like if you're going to be that guy, you're going to have to guard one of the most dangerous guys in the league and then also put up buckets on the other end. I think to your point, the frequency with which he's getting them up and the willingness to take them over like tight contests, that to me is like, this is a guy who went back and looked at where he struggled in that Dallas series and was like, never again. I'm going to learn from that. I'm going to work on those things. The Thunder's offense kind of gunked up when guys were consistently looking to go good to great and like weren't willing to just pull even if there was a guy in their face. That's where Oklahoma City has to grow. And if Jalen Williams does that, if he's able to make that leap and that, onboard that area of growth and development, and continue to be a high efficiency 3-point shooter while taking more pull-ups and more tightly contested ones, then the sky's the limit. Like that's the shot that separates pretty good players from superstars. If you are a pull-up 3-point shooter who's going to nail those shots with a hand in your face, coming off a screen, coming off a catch, whatever, and you're just going to take those shots and drain them, that's what separates the good from the great. And I think he has all of the tools in the toolbox to be that guy. And I would not be surprised if by the end of the season, we're talking about him as a number 2 in that kind of context, because the Thunder clearly have put all of these young guys in like a perfect developmental ecosystem to get to where they need to go, from the way that Dagno coaches to the lineups that they run to Chip Engelland, coming over from San Antonio as the shooting guru. Like they've given these guys all the runway to get there. I would not be surprised at all if he absolutely takes off.
All right, let's flip to the other end of the spectrum here for Western Conference expectations, from the top with the Thunder to near the bottom. The LA Clippers, Dan. The LA Clippers, if you look at BetMGM, the Clippers have the 4th worst odds to win the Western Conference. The Blazers, the Spurs at the bottom as well. And then you have the Clippers at plus 6,600. That means they don't even have play-in odds for the LA Clippers, despite the fact that you have James Harden, despite the fact you have Kawhi Leonard. But here's the problem. Kawhi Leonard hasn't practiced. According to Ty Lue, he's still rehabbing his knee. I think we know how this is going to go. What's going to happen is he's going to come back in November or December. He's going to start off slow. Then he's going to have a stretch where he looks like the MVP. It's going to instill a little bit of hope in Clippers fans. And then he's going to break down again in April. We've seen this story play out before. That's what's going to happen for the Clippers. And I feel bad for Clippers fans because the Thunder have their pick the next 3 years, or they have the rights to swap. They can't tank. They can't play their young guys who look good. Like, I'd love to play Kobe Brown. I'd love to play Cam Christie. Jordan Miller. Give me more Jordan Miller. Jordan Miller looks fun and encouraging, but you can't play so many young guys because then you're going to struggle. I just don't know what to do if I'm the Clippers front office right now. Lawrence Frank calls you up, Dan, and he says, "What do we do, Dan? What do we do? How do we operate this season?" What's your advice for him?
Go to one of the 38,000 toilets and start puking. I don't know. Yeah, it's I mean,
I look forward to going in the arena.
Sure. The sound you heard.
Do you think they have bidets on the toilets? Do you think they have bidets? No.
I think that's the recipe for disaster in a men's room at an NBA arena. So no, I'm going to hope not.
I've never used a bidet. Never used them. Are they worth all the hype?
First of all, you're sitting there assuming that I've got a whole wealth of bidet knowledge. Like I'm not some kind of hard scrabble man from the Northeast. Come on now.
I'm from a middle class family.
Yeah, no, I also have not partaken, Kevin. You're not going to believe this, but it's not experience.
How about the listeners? Hit us up in the mailbag.
Yeah, KOC show at yahoosports.com. Let us know all your bidet stories, please. Full bidet episode, week 3 of your new show, Dynamite.
Yes, for sure, yeah. just no bidet videos, please.
Yeah, right. Those do not go to the front of the line.
Those could be text only.
Those go to the FBI if those come in. The sound you heard, by the way, as you're describing, what the likely future is for Kawhi Leonard, was Michael Pina crying, like our former coworker at the Ringer, Michael Pina, just being very sad because he is Charlie Brown looking at Lucy with the football with the Clippers every single year, cannot quit them. And I understand it. Like the version of Kawhi, even the version of Kawhi Leonard that we've seen when he's been healthy in those spurts, as you mentioned in recent years, has looked like in the middle of last season, he looked like a top 5 player in the NBA. And that was a 50-win team that looked like it had every, weapon it could need. It just, there's no reason to believe at this point that you're going to see that in April, May, and June. And I mean, the optimistic take, I suppose, is take your time now to deal with the inflammation, figure out the plan in place, and then, give yourself maybe a better chance. Instead of saying you got to get to 65 games, give yourself a chance to maybe, if you manage it, to get to like 50, but then you've got them in April, May, and June. That would be tremendous. And that would be a wonderful thing to see. I think for everybody who remembers or has like a dim vision of what Kawhi Leonard at his peak was in the postseason, it would be lovely to see that more regularly now. It's just, as you laid out, the timeline is like he missed the last 8 games of last season with the right knee inflammation. He misses game 1 of the playoffs, comes back, does not look like himself, goes out again. We find out recently he had a procedure right after that in May, tries to go after Team USA, doesn't go great there, has to withdraw from that. The best thing that he said was that his knee was at a neutral state. And it's like, well, that's not a great sign if that's the best we can get to after a procedure and a couple of months off. And so now, this is what you're going to get. It's a guy who's had 3 knee surgeries since tearing his ACL 3 years ago, and seems like he's still kind of paying for it. And if that is the case, the best rose-colored glasses I can give you is like the Clippers scored pretty well last season when Harden was on the floor without PG and Kawhi. They scored like a top three or four offense in those minutes. They also got absolutely annihilated on defense and were outscored in those minutes. And there's no other real number 2 scoring option that you feel confident about on this roster as constructed. So maybe if your best case scenario is without Kawhi, we turn the clock back to Houston Harden and surround him with hard scrabble defenders, maybe, I don't know, but that seems like an awfully small needle to try to thread in 2024, 25. And yeah, it doesn't leave me feeling particularly optimistic for their chances.
I think you nailed it. That's what it's going to have to be. For as long as Kawhi is out, it's going to have to be the Harden show. You're going to have to see if he can turn back the clock as much as possible and put a bunch of shooters and long-arm, versatile defenders around him with Zubats at the 5 as his screener. And Zubats could have a big year. Zubats could be, the big beneficiary here for the Clippers. But ultimately, I don't think this team's going to make the playoffs. I think you look at other teams in the West. I just going up and down. BetMGM in order of Western Conference champion. Thunder, Mavericks, Nuggets, Timberwolves, Suns, Grizzlies, Warriors, Lakers, Pelicans, Kings, Rockets. Those are the teams ahead of the Clippers with the Spurs, Jazz, and Blazers behind them in terms of odds to win the Western Conference. I don't feel good about the Clippers ahead of any of those teams because a lot of those teams have better top-end depth. They have even more bench depth. They have more star depth. Doesn't matter the way you stack it up. The Clippers feel like a team that's going to fall into the lottery. Maybe they sneak into the play-in. That's a good thing for the Thunder. Could mean they have another lottery pick to toy with. One of those teams listed in there is the Sacramento Kings. DeMar DeRozan made his preseason debut with the Kings earlier this week. He had 15 points. He was perfect from the field, 6 of 6. He had 1 corner 3-pointer. They ran a lot of the same actions for him that they did for Harrison Barnes last season. I felt like watching the game. I came away impressed. I think DeRozan, one of the things that's been underrated with him a long time now is his passing ability. Mm-hmm. He had a beautiful kick-out pass to De'Aaron Fox. Didn't result in anything, but I just thought it was one of those examples of how, hey, DeRozan's more than just a bucket getter. His passing ability is going to fit into the flow of this offense pretty seamlessly.
And a super low turnover guy too, right? Among high usage players, one of the lowest turnover rates over the last handful of years. Yeah, I think the fascinating part is like, I think that there's reason to be skeptical of the fit of like how a mid-range heavy, doesn't shoot threes, not a great defender, higher usage player is going to fit into a spot that was previously occupied by Harrison Barnes. I think there's reason to be skeptical of that on both ends of the floor. And then you watch the first few minutes of that game and you're like, oh, right, this guy's really, really good. And he's really, really smart. And he's played a ton of basketball with a ton of different kinds of teammates in very different systems, in very different role responsibilities. And you're putting him next to an elite hub of offense in Domantas Sabonis, somebody that he can work off of in the two-man game, in the pick and roll, and the dribble handoff. You're putting him next to De'Aaron Fox as a guy who's going to generate or demand a ton of attention on his own. And yeah, the spacing might be a little bit tough to figure out at first, but I have a pretty high level of belief that smart guys with that level of talent can figure out how to play off of one another pretty quickly. Because it's not like you're saying these are sort of rookies who don't have the experience. Like, these guys all have a ton of reps in terms of how to fit into different structures. And Mike Brown he showed a capacity to like build a really good offense, right away 2 years ago. And then B, like get them to be like respectable on defense, which the Kings haven't been since, I don't know, like Rick Adelman. And then all of a sudden they were like reasonably good defensively last year. And then really good in the second half when Keon Ellis got into the lineup. So to me, it's like, I think that the question to me is less like, can the fit work right? And more just, is that enough top end talent when you get to, the depths of April and May, and you're like, they got to win a series against Denver. They got to win a series against, it was Golden State a couple of years ago, but you're looking at Minnesota at the top of the West. You're looking at Dallas. You're looking at Denver. You're looking at Oklahoma City. Like, the teams that they might have to deal with just have what feels to me like maybe a significant edge in that top end talent. But then that's maybe me having too jaundiced of an eye on it. Like, Fox and Sabonis are all NBA players. They're all-star players. It's only a couple of years since DeRozan did that, was an all-star player too. Yeah, in the East. But like, these are guys that are bona fide offensive like weapons that have all been singular forces that should, in theory, have the ability to like retain their efficiency, maybe even maximize their value, playing in combination with one another. So I think, and it's also just weird to think about, like, this is probably the biggest free agent the Kings have ever landed, right? Like, they're not a huge, and that's part of the reason. Like, you can get this guy in a sign and trade, but you're Sacramento, you can't necessarily just go shopping at the perfect fit store and go like, well,
Siakam, they wanted him, and he didn't want to go there.
And they were in on there was the OG Anunoby discussions, right? And it's like, can you get these guys to come, and then will they extend? And maybe, obviously it's just about finding the right guy and the right fit, but like a team that, like, I think if it had its druthers would be, can we find, the Aaron Gordon to go next to Sabonis, right? Or can we find the elite big wing creator that fits between Fox and Sabonis? And maybe, DeMar DeRozan isn't exactly who you envision when you sort of close your, vision in your mind's eye fitting that role, but he's a hell of a lot better than the other third options they've got. And it puts everybody else into sort of a more comfortable spot. And I don't know. I'm choosing to be optimistic about this. I think that the fit questions are real, but I think the talent might be good enough to overcome them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you have Sabonis jacking up more mid-range jumpers. We'll see if he continues. I'd still love to see Sabonis extend and shoot more threes.
I think Mike Brown would like that too. I think yes. That's part of how he would like to see the spacing be reoriented. Like, you're good enough at this. Let's crank the volume up. But obviously tough to make a guy who's been so successful playing one way suddenly start playing another.
Absolutely. And even DeRozan last season attempted a career-high number of three-pointers per game. Maybe he is willing to take a few more as well in order to help that fit issue that we're talking about with the Kings. A reminder to listeners to please subscribe to the Kevin O'Connor Show if you haven't done so already. It really does help out. And also give us a 5-star rating if you're listening on Spotify or Apple. All right, Dan, let's move to the Eastern Conference here. I want to talk about Philadelphia. Paul George is making his preseason debut on Friday night, but we got news that Embiid is not with the team. He's being evaluated, they said. I don't know exactly what this means, if he will be out for any extended period of time, but it's a little bit concerning nonetheless for Philadelphia. I think with Philly right now, what I'm most excited about in preseason is the way Tyrese Maxey's looking. He looks like he's gained muscle. He looks stronger. I think he even looks a little bit more explosive at the rim on the layups. The shot looks quicker. To me, if Embiid's out for any extended period of time, they need Maxey to push 30 points per game. I think he's capable of doing it. He averaged over 25 last year. What stuck out to you so far this preseason with Philadelphia, and how optimistic are you about them as one of those teams that can push Boston when we've talked about New York as one of those teams that's built and constructed that way?
Yeah, it's will the best laid plans on paper work out in practice? And obviously the Embiid, anytime you hear like, well, Joel Embiid's being evaluated, you go like, oh, well, is it time for our friends at the Right Sturkey Sanchez to start hanging themselves? Is Mike Levin going to be doing a podcast in the dark, shirtless soon? And that's possible. We could be there pretty quick. But the whole the gambit here was, it requires Embiid to be full tilt, full strength, multiple legs, ambulatory Joel Embiid in April, May, and June. And so it's a similar conversation to the one we had about
Is
Kawhi
it a bad
Leonard.
thing on that note, Dan? Is it a bad thing if he misses time now? Couldn't it actually be a good thing if they wrap Embiid and bubble wrap until, I don't know, February, and then bring him back fresh and perfect shape and then have him begin his season then? Is that the worst thing?
No, I mean, I think, this is why you have Andre Drummond, right? Overqualified backup center Andre Drummond. And, it's why you get multiple stars capable of operating as like number one options in Tyrese Maxey and Paul George. I think absolutely the messaging coming out of Philly has been, Joel is not any longer concerned about making sure he's MVP eligible or all NBA eligible or hits certain games played metrics or whatever. I'm sure
See you in April.
Yeah,
Come on,
right.
Joel. Come back in April.
Give him enough time to get ramped up. Forever ramping up. Joel Embiid and ramp ups. Like real match made in heaven. Peanut butter and jelly. Joel Embiid and ramp ups. But I think, yeah, if you are, the concern I would have, and this is concern trolling a little bit or glass half empty look, but would be if you are without Embiid for an extended period of time, you are then asking a lot of Tyrese Maxey. You're asking a lot of Paul George in ways that maybe, run up their odometer before you get to the games that matter most. And so like, that's the concern I would have, but it's why Daryl Morey makes the money that he makes to fill out the roster in the way that he has with, depth pieces that should be able to all, theoretically step into slightly larger roles and occupy larger shares of the offense and more responsibility on the opportunity, on the off chance that you don't have one of your main guys for an extended period of time. I think also that, hope springs eternal in September and October. So like maybe this is just abundance of caution evaluation and he'll be completely fine for opening night. But I think the idea, like the entire premise of this team was do everything we can to get another superstar in the door so that we have three of these guys ready to go come April. And if a little bit of extra time off for Joel Embiid at the beginning of the year, coming off of the Olympics, coming off of the short summer, all that kind of stuff, if it affords him the opportunity to be at his best when his best is required, I don't think anybody in Philly is going to mind too much. Although, like things are going a little bit rocky for Philadelphia folks right now. Like Philly's going down to the Mets, the Eagles are in dire straits. Like these are tough times. So maybe the Sixers need to Tyrese Maxey with the effervescence, the ebullience, the like sunshine that he brings, that might be needed more now than ever.
Now tell me this, I'm not a big baseball guy anymore. Sure. I used to love baseball. It was one of my number one sports when I was a little kid. Phillies this year, weren't they having an unbelievable season in July, like best record in baseball, and things kind of petered out towards the end of the season? Then they lose in 4 games in the NLDS. Is that accurate, Dan? They were one of the best teams in baseball by far.
Absolutely. They had the grim luck of running into a team that has been fueled apparently by Grimace from McDonald's. The New York Mets and Grimace is another match made in heaven, just like Joel Embiid and ramp ups.
Terrible.
It's wild.
Typical.
It's not. I mean, this is also one of those things we would say like this, if you looked at like the full season numbers for that Udoka Celtics team, you're like, it's pretty good, but like the version that they were in the first half, dramatically different from the version in the second half. The Mets have been awesome for like the last few months. So the Phillies rolled up a big lead early and then were like a little bit worse later in the season. And the Mets.
Are you a Mets guy or a Yankees guy?
I'm a Mets guy. My dad was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And so when the Dodgers went to LA, he was like heartbroken and was like, well, I'm never going to root for the Yankees because that was like the enemy of his youth that forever stopped the Brooklyn Dodgers sort of a championship. So the Devine family waited until the Mets showed up. And then all of a sudden I was born into that pain and the Knicks pain and, various other pains.
Oh, I mean, things could be good right now. We'll see.
That's right. We're taking it the way it comes now. But the challenge is, I'm talking to dads and moms at pickup and at school, and they're like, "Does your daughter dig the Knicks now that like?" I have tried to shield her from it. Like, I'll let her choose that if she wants to, but I'm not putting it on her because 25 years of that was a lot. Like you gotta let them come to it on their own.
Let's talk about basketball again. Zaccharie Risacher made his debut earlier in this week for the Atlanta Hawks, the number one pick in the draft. I can't remember a time in my life watching the NBA where number one pick has been talked about less, for good reason. I mean, he's an international prospect. He wasn't like in the college basketball limelight. He isn't a traditional, high volume scorer type. He's projected as more of a role player. And so that's why Risacher isn't getting a lot of hype for the Hawks this year, but he was great in his debut at 18 points. He was used all over the floor. I watched him all pre-draft season, Dan. I'm curious about your thoughts from an NBA perspective. What did you see from Risacher in his Hawks debut?
Yeah, you're not going to believe this, Kevin. I wasn't grinding a whole lot of French tape in the run up to the draft. I entrust that to capable folks like you and Kristen Peak, our colleague, and then I'll crib their takes for later. What I saw was, I think he seemed to play and fit in a lot better than I think some of the concerns that I had read, where it's like, well, he's maybe a little slight of frame and maybe he won't be able to sort of handle physically. And he looked like he belonged. Like, I'm not sure if he's put on some muscle in the post-draft process, but he looked all of like 6'8", little over 200 pounds and moved pretty well. I thought I was surprised and encouraged. I thought it was a pleasant surprise. He was setting some screens and diving to the rim. Like, it wasn't just I'm hanging out 28 feet from the basket and hoping the ball comes to me. Like, he was in the action more often and was diving hard to the rim. He dunked on Enrique Freeman in that game. Like, he looked like someone who could vary what he was doing on the offensive end of the floor. And then he's going to be playing off of Trae Young. We know the ball's going to be in Trae Young's hands a ton. So what do you do when you don't have it? Looked shot ready on the weak side, moved without the ball to try to give, passing lanes or, an angle to get a kick out feed when Trae was working in the pick and roll. Ran the lane in transition, was active, aggressive going to the rim. I think obviously every young guy is going to have a steep learning curve on defense at the NBA level. He is going to get picked on by, wings that have 40 pounds on him and guys that they're going to put him in action and make him make decisions, make him think, which is always death for 18 and 19-year-olds in the NBA. But I think as an immediate, first blush introduction, that's the guy that looks like he belongs on an NBA floor. The jump shot looks fluid. It was good with his feet set. There's a couple of times where it's like, all right, you put up like a 18-foot running push shot off the pick and roll. And all right, maybe keep that one in your back pocket. Don't necessarily bring that one out around company too much. But I think you saw somebody that seemed to have some comfort operating in a lot of different ways right off the rip. And I think that's pretty encouraging for a Hawks team that's they're not gonna try to be bad because San Antonio owns their draft for the next 3 years. So it's how can we be good and how can we put the best kind of infrastructure around Trae Young to elevate? 6'8" wing who can shoot, who can drive, who can dribble, who can run pick and roll, and who seems to fit in on that's a nice piece to add in that sort of mix in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think Atlanta's not going to suck. Like you said, they're not going to try to suck. They don't have their picks. The only place they'd want to trade Trae Young is to San Antonio.
Right, to get it all back.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the only way that they would end up sucking. But ultimately, Atlanta's going to be solid. They're going to be competitive. And with Risacher, you mentioned it, Dan, the screening, the rolling. He had a nice dunk at the rim. I think with Risacher, I'm encouraged by the way in which they used him in that preseason opener. It looks like they're willing to take advantage of all his versatile talents in the half court, because with Risacher, one of the reasons why I was a bit lower on him than clearly Atlanta was, I had him, I think, ranked 11th on my board, is the lack of belief in his shooting ability. Risacher last season, it'll be interesting to see the way this develops in the NBA, because he shot the hell out of it in this preseason opener. The shot looks good mechanically, but last season, his first 34 games, he hit 48% of his three-pointers. Over his final 31 games, he hit only 29.8% of his three-pointers. And then his previous 3 seasons, it was the latter half of the season that it better resembled. He made only 32% of his threes over the previous 3 seasons overseas. So he had an amazing hot shooting stretch to begin the year at 48%. And then he went back closer to his norm. In his time overseas, he's also only a 71.6% guy from the free throw line. So I think with Risacher, he's somebody that he needs to hit the shot, but if he isn't, it's at least encouraging that the Hawks are letting him do a little bit with the ball. They're letting him do a little bit as a screener. There's no doubt about his ability as a cutter. So with that Quinn Snyder offense, if they're playing with even more motion than they did last year, now year 2 with Snyder, that could allow Risacher to have some value, even if he's not, 40% from 3. And that's where I think the encouraging thing is from the Atlanta perspective. They're going to be competitive. They're going to try to make the playoffs. They've more than likely hit the play-in. I want to talk about another team that's kind of in that weird in-between phase. There's these certain teams in the Eastern Conference. You have your clear-cut favorites up top, and then you have these teams that are like, who are we? Who am I? And one of those teams is the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls say they want to be competitive this year. They want to try to make the playoffs. They get Zach LaVine back. They add Josh Giddey. They have Kobe White, who had a great breakout season, and maybe Kobe White gets even better this year. But the Bulls are another one of those teams in the East where I can't quite figure out who they are and what direction that they're actually going and what's best for them. What's your overall assessment right now, Dan, of the Bulls, the state of the Chicago Bulls?
Underwhelming. Yeah. They tend to be year to year a team that I have a hard time getting particularly excited about one way or the other, either like furious or excited. With the notable exception of the beginning of that season where they remade the team and they bring in DeMar DeRozan from San Antonio, they bring in Lonzo Ball, and they've got Caruso there, and there was an identity, there was juice, there was we are going to be pressure packing on the defensive end. We're going to create turnovers. We're going to get out and run. We're going to have Lonzo sort of being the connective tissue and the hit ahead force. We're going to get Zach LaVine out on the open floor. Like there was a plan and there was an idea for how we want to play. And then obviously the plan couldn't be that great if losing Lonzo Ball means that the next 3 years suck. Like that's not, that is an indication that the organization was not operating at the optimal levels, right? I don't know if we can expect anything from Lonzo Ball at this point. I think anything we get is gravy, and it will be nice to see it. He's hoping to be able to be back on the floor.
See him on the court. Wouldn't that be nice just to see him on the court and see him throw a nice, beautiful kick out pass, an outlet? That's all I want to see.
Yeah, at this point, yeah, even just if he's running, give me a stint of cardio. Like let me see him run up and down the floor for a few minutes just to know it's like proof of life. Like I know that he has been working so hard and has had so many reversals and so many procedures. Like I don't anticipate him being a transformational figure, but I think the idea, and it's also probably why it's the idea of the Josh Giddey move too, right? Like they have gotten killed for not getting any picks from Oklahoma City's overflowing war chest of draft picks in the Alex Caruso trade. But I think the idea is, all right, big point guard who can see and who can create and who can, maybe inject a little bit of pace and a little bit of creativity into our stagnant and static offense. Like the idea. Obviously, not that Giddey and Lonzo Ball are necessarily same players, but I think that's the idea. It's just like to what end? And if you are putting the ball in Giddey's hands, is that minimizing Kobe White? Now, Kobe White's a hell of a shooter, and maybe he's better optimized as an off-ball player and a complementary creator. But, he was the one sort of silver lining to last year's team. And now you're maybe minimizing him. Zach LaVine, I think if everybody's given their truth serum, they would prefer if he was somewhere else, including Zach LaVine, if he was given his truth serum. But the remaining $138 million on that contract has rendered it impossible to find a market for him. So it's like,
They need LaVine to be good enough to make him a risk worth taking for a team that feels like they have finals aspirations. That to me is the key for the Bulls getting out of this mess that they're in. It's Zach LaVine being good and somebody else saying, LaVine can help us pursue a championship. We'll take him with the 3 years remaining, including this one, on his massive contract. And that gets the Bulls out of the situation. That would put them in a situation where Kobe White is able to be the man for this season. Hopefully it means more touches for their rookie Matas Buzelis. Hopefully it means that a guy like Lonzo is able to play and be productive. Maybe it means even more opportunity for Ayo Dosunmu, one of the guys on that team that I really like. So I think for the Bulls, like, it's that LaVine mistake that they made that is representative of their whole organizational objective, which is like, just sneak into the playoffs. That's it. Like, they're not a team that I feel is trying to win a finals. They're not a team that actually cares about that from my perspective here. They're happy just being in the middle, just being a solid team. And that's sad. It is sad for a team that has the greatest dynasty in the last 30, 40 years, the 90s Bulls, a team that has a massive international fan base. They should be a team that everybody wants to go to, everybody wants to watch, everybody wants to have a Bulls jersey. But there's nobody on this team right now that represents that. And that's in part because they were too late to rebuild last time. Right now, they're still stuck in the middle. And that's why there's so much criticism, as you said, with them not getting picks back with Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso. Giddey was so bad in those playoffs and so irrelevant in those playoffs for the Thunder. I like Giddey. I think he's got a lot of talent. He's only 22 years old. He just turned 22 literally yesterday. It was his birthday. He's still young. Giddey's value is diminished in that postseason when you factor in the importance of reliable three-point shooting ability. And so the Bulls not getting a pick back in that, to me, it's unforgivable and shows a lack of care, negotiation talent to get at least a second back, a first back. Like, how do you not get that back for Alex Caruso, who was so in demand? So I think for the Bulls here, if I'm a Bulls fan, you talk about, Philly fans feeling depressed with the Phillies getting eliminated and the Eagles underwhelming. If I'm a Bulls fan, man, I'll tell you what, dude, I think that's probably top 5 most depressing fan bases right now in the NBA.
Yeah, there's just not a lot to get.
No direction.
Yeah,
no hope.
Yeah, to feel like what are we doing this for? And like Arturas Karnisovas says on Media Day, like, we're here to win. Developing our players is crucial, but we won't
Great pronunciation, Dan. I just call him AK. Arturas or AK. Just
we won't sacrifice the integrity of the game just for development. And it's like, okay, cool, but what are you hanging your hat on as an organization, as a team on the floor? What's the identity of the Bulls on the offensive end? What's the identity of the Bulls on the defensive end?
There's no identity.
And so like there's just it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of there. And like it's in a way, and it's depressing, but like it's emblematic of we're just still like we're waiting to see if Patrick Williams can make the leap. And you're like, yeah, he's young, and yeah, he's got a frame, and yeah, there's discrete skills, but that's what the Bulls feel like en masse. Like there's a bunch of stuff and we got to see if it turns into anything. And they will most likely be the organizational version of like 10 points and 5 rebounds that you don't really remember, which is sort of like what you get. And like, I don't know. They can say that everyone's undefeated on Media Day. They can say we're here to win. We're not here to disrespect the integrity of the game. They owe a top 10 protected pick to San Antonio. And when the rubber meets the road in the second half of the season, if they're staring at the possibility of losing that, or maybe having a shot at Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey or whoever. Yeah, like integrity only goes but so far, my friend, in the NBA. And I would not be surprised if we find ourselves having very different conversations about what the Bulls' incentive structure is come March and April than we are right now.
The Bulls should tank their asses off. That's what they should do.
They might not have to. I mean, that's like, such a weird place to be in at the very beginning of the season, but like they might just be bad enough on their own, but the state of the bottom of the East is such that they can be bad 100%. And they still might be the 10th best team in the conference.
Exactly.
Like it's a wild bottom.
That's the fear. And so I think if I'm a Bulls fan, I'm like, what are we? Like at least some of these bad teams, you feel like you know who you are. You know you're in a rebuilding phase. You know what you are. You know what you are if you're the Hornets and you're on the up and up. You got LaMelo coming back. You got Brandon Miller in his second year. You got all this young talent. You know you're on an upward trajectory, but the Bulls just feel stuck in the middle. And that's what it's been like with the Bulls pretty much as long as I've been covering the NBA over the last decade. And that's too bad. Dan, this has been fun. I look forward to having you on again. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, man. Thanks so much, Kevin. Same to you. We'll be back with another episode of the Kevin O'Connor Show next Tuesday. Please be sure to send your mailbag questions to kocshow@yahoosports.com, and please be sure to subscribe. Thanks to John and the entire production staff for producing. Thank you to you for listening to the Kevin O'Connor Show. Hope you have a beautiful weekend.